Bam! Welcome, folks, to yet another exhilarating and stimulating set of notes provided by me, Mr. Kolka. This time, it's on cell parts and their functions. You should have open the CAMI chart that has all the cell parts and functions with it. This will go in order of that. So without further ado, let's get it rolling. Okay, find cell membrane on your chart. It's also called the plasma membrane. And what you want to put in here is what it is, description, right? Description of what it is. It's a thin layer of lipid and proteins that separate the cell from its environment. Now, you know lipids already because we looked at them when we did SOAP. Right? We talked about hydrophilic and hydrophobic. Lipids are going to look the same. These fats are going to look the same. They encapsulate the cell and they control movement of materials in and out of the cell. If you did the ideal cell size lab, we talked about the nutrients getting into the potato through osmosis and diffusion. So we referenced this through the cell membrane. So that's a good start. Okay, now find cytoplasm on your chart. The cytoplasm is the liquid or the goo that's inside the cell. And you can see it's pointing to, looks like nothing here. But since you guys have already labeled your cells, you should know where the cytoplasm is. All right, so the cytoplasm is this liquid that is around the cell. It's all through here. And I attribute it or give you an analogy of it's like a gusher. You ever bite into a gusher, those delicious little fruit snacks, and explodes all over the place? If you bit into a cell, that's what would happen. The cytoplasm would come leaking out. So it's the center for most of the cell's metabolic activity, and it suspends all these organelles in this gel, in this liquid. Two parts of the cytoplasm are the cytosol and the cytoskeleton. All right, the cytosol is the fluid portion of the cytoplasm, which I just referenced to you, and contains dissolved compounds used by the cell. The cytoskeleton is the network of tubes throughout the cytoplasm. You can't see them, right? But they're in there. They provide support and shape for the cell, and they allow the cell to move. Now, on your third column, it says drawing. You do not have to draw any of these through CAMI unless you want to, but that's not required. So now look, let me move myself over here. So now look. In this diagram, you can see the cytosol, which is the liquid, and then you can see the cytoskeleton, which is these little tubules, these little lines. Many diagrams are not going to show you that, but you have to know that they're there. All right, now to the nucleus. Now you should know the nucleus is the control center of a cell. It contains and protects the genetic material, which is DNA, which we all know is deoxyribonucleic acid. It controls and regulates cellular activity. So whatever happens in the cell is under the direction of the nucleus. The nucleolus is this large, dense ball, looks like a ball, that's inside of the nucleus. And it's really dark circled. You can see it right there, dark circle. It's the site of ribosome production. Ribosomes are produced here, and ribosomes are really, really important. And we're going to talk about those coming up. So now to ribosomes. Ribosomes assemble proteins from amino acids, like a protein factory. They're composed of RNA. RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, RNA, ribonucleic acid, and proteins. They're found in both eukaryotic and prokaryotic cells. Remember that eukaryotic cells have nucleus. Prokaryotes do not. So if we look down here, you can see the ribosomes are these little, what's sometimes called studs, or these little balls, all over the endoplasmic reticulum. When they're on the endoplasmic reticulum, it's called the rough ER. When they're not there, it's called the smooth, because they're not studded out or they're not bumpy. All right, so ribosomes assemble proteins. That brings us to the ER. The endoplasmic reticulum is abbreviated with ER. It's an extensive network of membranes and sacs. And if you look over here, it's got all these little membranes that go through it, studded on here with ribosomes. So this one would be the rough ER that we're looking at. Produces, processes, and transports cellular materials. It's kind of like a highway. And if you watch that video, the guy referenced it that way. There are two types, the rough and the smooth ER. So here's what they do. The smooth ER, sometimes known as the SER, I don't call them this, the SER and the RER. I find that to be confusing, so I just call them the smooth ER and the rough ER. The smooth ER has no ribosomes, that's why it's called smooth. All right, it synthesizes lipids, means it makes lipids. Anytime you see synthesize, it means it makes or creates. It's a good vocab word. So it makes or creates lipids and steroids. It transports these macromolecules as well. The rough ER contains surface ribosomes. Remember we said it has all little dots all over it? That's how you can tell the rough from the smooth. It also makes or synthesizes proteins for export by the cell. That brings us to the Golgi apparatus. Now you can call this thing the Golgi apparatus, or the Golgi body, or the Golgi complex. All the same thing. So if you're doing something like a reading guide, which you have during this week as well, it may reference it as something different. It's the same thing, okay? And what it does is it processes and packages proteins made by the ER, which we just discussed. Remember, the ER is the endoplasmic reticulum, for release by the cell. And if you look at this ugly looking thing with these, I don't know, what do you call it? I think it looks like if you ever ate ribbon candy, it's not a very popular candy. It was old, but ribbon candy looks like this. If you ever had ribbon candy, go look it up if you get a chance. Now, this should be the end of your first page of notes. You can stop here if it is day 1. I'm going to continue on the next slide for day 2, but you can stop here if you're doing this on day 1. Okay, welcome to day 2 of the same set of notes. Brings us to the mitochondrion, or the mitochondria. Okay, the mitochondria we all know is the powerhouse of the cell. You're not going to say that. You're not. Okay, my 3rd grader says that. That is not a high school definition. We are not going to say that. Okay, it changes energy stored in food into a usable form of energy, which is ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, which we've already gone over, so you should know. That is used to power all cell activities. It's also the site of cellular respiration, which is going to be very important for us in a couple units. And I hope we're in person, or at least hybrid for that, because that's tough. The next organelle you might have seen on one of those diagrams is the lysosome. And if you looked it up, you'll see it contains digestive enzymes, and it breaks down large molecules of carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and digests old organelles. So when organelles get used up and they're no longer valid, they go to the lysosome to be recycled. Boom, recycling center. That's how you can remember it. Okay, specialized membrane to protect the cell. That's what they have in there. That brings us to cilia. Well, what is cilia? Short hair-like projections found in large numbers on the surface of cells. And cilia can be arranged in different manners in different cells in different organisms, right? But anytime you see these short little hair-like projections, it's called cilia. For our purposes right now, it aids in movement of the cell or movement of materials over the cell. And that's what they look like. Right? Short little hair-like projection. This is blown up and magnified, so it looks a little different for you. This is cilia on the outside of a cell here that helps it move. The cilia will beat together and allow it to move through water. That brings us to another cell appendage called flagella. Okay, or flagellum, you may have heard it as. It's a long hair-like structure extending from a cell. And if you look over here, you see this long whip-like tail. That's the flagella. It moves in whip-like motions to move cells. Actually, that's not 100% true. It has been proven and recently just discovered within the last 3 months that when sperms swim, sperm cells have flagellum, and when they swim, they do not swim like a paddle. It swims around in a circle like that. The flagella rotate. So it does help it move, but not always like a whip-like fashion. All right, one of the most important organelles, especially in a plant cell, is a vacuole. If you see over here, you can tell right away whether it's an animal or plant cell just on the size of the vacuole. If it has this enormous vacuole in it, it's a plant cell, because plants need more water than the animal cells do. All right, they absorb water or may store proteins, ions, and waste products. They may be specialized, small and numerous in the animal cells, and large in the plant cells. You can tell it's a plant cell by the chloroplast being green and the enormous vacuole. That brings us to the chloroplast. The chloroplast enables plant cells and other photosynthetic organisms to make sugars in food. Can you guess what sugar? We learned about it a few units ago. Glucose. C6H12O6. Glucose. It's the site of photosynthesis and it contains chlorophyll. We will see these if you are in person, and I will direct you to slides on Google if you are not. These are all chloroplasts inside of plant cells. That brings us now to the cell wall. The cell wall protects the plant and helps maintain its shape. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. Plants have a cell wall. It's found outside of the membrane and gives it its rigid structure. When you crunch a leaf or you snap down a piece of celery, you're snapping through the cell wall. Congratulations, you finished the notes. But after finishing the notes, you should be able to do this, so give it a shot. Name as many cell parts, organelles as you can without looking at your notes. See what happens. Choose 2 and give the functions. Whatever 2 you want. Try to say them out loud. Try to say them to someone else. I don't care. Put in a text. Doesn't matter to me. Name a cell part found in a plant but not in your cells or not in animal cells. All right? Let me know if you got any questions. We'll be talking about this in class.